In 2011, one of America's most powerful universities made a choice that cost them everything, and it started with a decision made decades earlier by men who knew exactly what they were ignoring. Let's establish the scale first. Penn State football wasn't just a program, it was a $100 million a year empire. The team generated roughly $50 million in annual revenue. The football complex itself sat at the center of 50,000 students' identity and the state's cultural gravity. By 2010, head coach Joe Paterno had won 409 games over 46 years. He was, by any measure, untouchable. That's the context for understanding what happened next. But the money and the wins were built on a foundation no one wanted to examine. In 1994, 17 years before the scandal broke, a graduate assistant named Mike McQueary witnessed something in a locker room shower that he couldn't unsee. He saw Jerry Sandusky, the retired defensive coordinator, with a 10-year-old boy. McQueary was 21 years old, a student athlete with everything to lose. He left the shower immediately. What McQueary did next reveals the first critical decision. He didn't go to police, he called his father. His father told him to speak to the head coach. That same evening, McQueary walked into Joe Paterno's home and reported what he'd seen. Paterno listened. Then Paterno made his own choice. He reported it to his athletic director, Tim Curley, and his boss, Vice President Gary Schultz, but he didn't call law enforcement. Neither did they. This is where you need to hold the timeline. What everyone involved didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that this moment would define the university's moral character for the next 17 years. Curley and Schultz did report the incident to campus police, but in language so vague it barely registered as serious. An investigation was opened, then it was quietly closed. Sandusky was never charged. He was allowed to retire with a pension. By 1996, Sandusky had founded the Second Mile, a charity for at-risk youth. The university's leadership knew about the 1994 incident. They knew, but Sandusky continued to have access to Penn State facilities. He continued to recruit young boys through his charity, and Penn State's football program continued to win year after year, bowl game after bowl game. The institutional silence was now a deliberate choice repeated annually. Between 1998 and 2011, at least 8 more victims came forward internally. 8. Each time the response followed the same pattern: report to administrators, not to law enforcement. Each time the matter was contained. Each time Sandusky faced no legal consequences. Penn State's leadership made the calculus: the reputational cost of public scandal exceeded the moral cost of silence. That's not a guess. That's what the evidence later showed. Then came November 2010. A grand jury in Pennsylvania was investigating Sandusky. McQueary, that same graduate assistant from 1994, was called to testify. He told the truth. Law enforcement finally moved. On November 5, 2010, over 16 years after that shower incident, Sandusky was arrested and charged with 40 counts of child sexual abuse. But the arrest wasn't the end of Penn State's crisis. It was the beginning. Because as prosecutors dug deeper, they discovered that 4 Penn State officials, including Curley, Schultz, and now President Graham Spanier, had conspired to conceal the abuse. They knew Sandusky had been reported for sexually abusing a child. They knew he was still coaching and recruiting at their facilities. They did nothing. On November 9, 2011, 1 year later, the full story broke in the media. Penn State had covered up child sexual abuse for nearly 2 decades. The fallout was instantaneous and total. Paterno, despite his 409 wins and his legacy, was fired. Spanier was forced out. Curley and Schultz faced criminal charges. The university faced a $60 million fine from the NCAA, sanctions, a postseason ban, a loss of scholarships, recruiting restrictions. But the number that matters most isn't $60 million, it's the count of victims. Sandusky was eventually convicted of 45 counts of child sexual abuse. The identified victims numbered at least 10, though the true number is likely higher. Those are the costs, the human costs, that Penn State's institutional ambition had obscured for nearly 2 decades. What's instructive here isn't that Penn State failed, it's the mechanism of failure. No single person woke up and decided to protect a child predator. Instead, each administrator made a rational decision under pressure: report internally, contain the risk, protect the institution. Multiply that choice by multiple people across multiple decades and you get systematic concealment. That's how large organizations enable atrocity. The Penn State scandal cost the university far more than $60 million in fines. It cost them their moral authority. It cost Paterno his legacy. It cost Spanier his freedom, he served time in prison. And it cost at least 10 children their safety and their childhoods. The ambition that built Penn State football into a $100 million empire was the same ambition that blinded the institution to the cost of that empire. The scandal fundamentally reshaped how universities handle abuse allegations. Mandatory reporting laws tightened, institutional liability increased, but the deeper lesson remains: when an organization's survival depends on protecting its reputation, the incentives align toward concealment, not disclosure. Penn State's tragedy was one of rational actors making irrational choices in aggregate. Subscribe for more histories of institutional collapse, where we count the actual cost of ambition unchecked.